age ago, the beating heart of our people was a king who knew only victory. He wanted nothing more than an honorable death on the battlefield. Yet, none could match him, and so he wandered the earth, becoming lost in time and tide. Then we too lost our honest purpose, while silk-clad men sat upon the throne. But tremble now, all cities that lay under the stars, for out of the shadows and mists of the land of promise, our courage has been rekindled, our heart has returned, and the world will burn.
All right, how's everybody doing tonight? I apologize profusely for two things. Number one, I scheduled this stream apparently at the wrong time. And number two, I was over in John's Longbox doing a stream there, and we got to talking about, well, our guest bailed on us, so we started to just talk about nonsense, and we were trading childhood stories about getting beaten up, as kids, as high schoolers, things like that, and things just got way out of hand. So let's see. Hopefully you can hear me if someone in the chat can let me know that, okay, good enough. You can hear me. Yes, Michael, if you want to hear those stories, go on over to John's Longbox and listen to his stream from tonight a little bit later. Why in the world? I thought I switched the background here. Just give me 1 second. Let me show the background. So what we were supposed to be talking about at John's was Halloween. And what I'm going to do tonight is talk about, let me reduce myself here, talk about Halloween, the myths, legends, and the backing of Halloween, basically the mythological backing of Halloween. But here's the thing. I did a really old video called Myths, Legends, and Halloween. It was 5 years ago I did this video. I just looked it up a little while ago today. And I was just going to review it and then give you basically the same spiel here tonight. But quite honestly, I watched that old video and it was really well done. Not to pat myself on the back, but I knew what I was doing 5 years ago. Let's put it that way. And it was only 18 minutes, and it only has about less than 500 views on the entire video. So I figured, let's just play the video. Quite honestly, it's me talking again. It would just be like me talking here, but I want to play the video because I actually would be much more thorough by listening to this video, which no one has listened to because 500 people. So it's on YouTube. Let's share this here, and I'm just going to play the video, let it play for 18 minutes, and it talks about the myths, legends that are the backing of Halloween, and I go really in depth into that. And after that, we'll just see who's here and have a little chat about myths and legends and Halloween. How's that? Sound good? Hopefully that's not too out of the blue for everybody, but again, it's just me talking for 18 minutes, even though it's a recording. So I'm just going to play that video. Today, I wanted to do something a little fun. I don't know what day you're listening to this on, but when I'm recording this, it's Halloween, and I'm going to go over the myth and the legend and even the folk tales to some extent about Halloween and why it exists. And the thing is, I want to say right off the bat that I'm dealing with myth and I'm dealing with legends. You may have heard a different story for all of this, and that's fine. Myths and legends have plenty of different, even contradicting stories at time. So this is just for fun. Take it for what it's worth. So a lot of people treat Halloween as if it was almost a semi-holiday. And to some extent, they're right. It's meant to be the day before a feast day. And November the 1st is supposed to be the feast day of All Saints. And that's what Halloween actually means. It's an old term meaning All Hallows Eve, or the evening before the day of All Hallows, that is to say, the evening before the day of All Saints, which is a great feast in the church. And the reason why that feast was placed there was because of something from old Irish Celtic myth. And those holidays that were supplanted by All Saints' Day were the two holidays of Samhain's Day, which was on October 31st, and Beltane's Day, which is the 1st of November. And to explain the connection between the two, I'll have to go far, far back into Irish history and mythology. Now, there were a number of people that lived in Ireland long before the Celts. The Celts got there, the place was certainly already inhabited, and they took over the land from another group of people. These people would be the Tuatha Dé or the people of the goddess Donna. And these people were great rulers of Ireland, and they ruled it for quite some time. But before them, there was the Firbolg. And the Firbolg were Greek, actually. They came from the city of Cadmus, which would be Argos. And they were slaves there. They were called the Men of the Bag. And if you know anything about Argos, it's very hilly, very rocky, and there was very little soil there. So what the Men of the Bag, the Firblogs, had to do was they were slaves that were sent to other places in Greece that had soil to fill up a bag of soil and have to carry it all the way back to Argos so that they could make fields so that people could plant crops around there. And so they escaped this enslavement and came all the way to Ireland. But their rule of Ireland wasn't very long. They were supplanted by the Tuatha Dé Danann, who actually were said to have come to Ireland through the air. But prior to the Firblogs and their control of Ireland, there was yet another race behind them, and that is the race of the Shay. And the Shay are a race that is shrouded in mystery and myth. And they were great users of magic, supposedly. And aside from all of those races in Ireland, there was another race which always tried to put Ireland under its thumb, always tried to put it under tribute and make them pay tribute. And these were the Fomor. And the Fomor were said to live beyond the sea or underneath the sea, so far to the west of Ireland, and they came up from beneath the sea and tried to take over Ireland insomuch as they would take spoils from it all the time. And the Fomor never really wanted Ireland for themselves. They just wanted whoever was there to pay tribute to them. And the Fomor were said to be very ugly, misshapen, grotesque people. That is to say, they would have one hand and one foot, or one eye and one ear, or no nose, and things like this. But they're always seen as people. Now, this is very important because a lot of people in their fanciful representation of the Fomor represent them as monsters. But this is not actually how Irish myth works, because in Ireland, throughout its history, monsters, you will find very few monsters indeed, and certainly there was no great account of destroying a monster. The only really big myth around destroying monsters was the battle of the cat heads and the dog heads. And when that battle took place, all of the men who fought against these monsters that had cat heads and dogs heads were ashamed to actually fight these creatures, because it was a shame to fight anyone who wasn't a man. Only men would give you honor. Only fighting against other men would give you honor as an Irish warrior. Fighting against a monster meant nothing. It was actually a shameful act that you had to actually go out and do this. So the Fomor were men. And even though they're pictured as other things, monstrous, that is to say, non-men, in some of these pictures, in the actual mythology, they're always pictured as men, just very ugly, grotesque men. You might say monstrous looking men, but not monsters in the technical term that we use today. Now, of all these races, As you go farther back into Irish history, they become more great and powerful users of magic. Now, even the Celts, who were the last ones to take over Ireland, they had magic users, they had their druids, but the Tuatha Dé Danann were greater magic users than the Celts. The Furblogs, well, they were Greek and they were foreigners, really so much they just concentrated on their arms. But the Shay were the greatest magic users of them all. But at the same time, as every succeeding race came in and took over Ireland, it was the strength of their arms, it was the strength of their fighting, which eventually won the day. And when the Shay kept on being displaced and kept on being displaced and kept on being displaced by these new waves of people that would come into Ireland and conquer it, they were driven farther and farther into the hills. And when I say into the hills, I mean that quite literally. Now, I find it quite funny when you watch modern movies and they show these historical settings where you have these giant castles and palaces. There's a new one coming out with Robin Hood, and they show these giant castles. And in the old myth, especially in the older myth, like we have with the Shay and most of Irish mythology, people didn't live in castles. They're called palaces, they're called castles sometimes in the myth, but what they lived in were called raths. And a rath is basically a hollowed out hill, and that's where they would live. So these people would live in hollowed out hills. And sometimes they would actually build a castle-like structure, a wooden structure, and then just heap dirt on top of it instead of actually hollowing out a hill, but it's the same effect. They lived inside the hills. And I suppose you could think of it as if they lived in hobbit-like holes. I wouldn't say they'd be as comfortable as a hobbit hole, but this is the kind of places where they would live. And the farther back you go in history, the more and more these people actually lived in raths and hollowed out hills. And this happened right up until, at the very least, I would say, the 1200s. There are accounts of this happening in Ireland, in England, in Scotland. Even the story of Robin Hood has characters that are trolls. They're actually just dwarves. They live out in the forest, in the hills. They live under the ground or in a hill. So the farther you go back in history, this is what they lived in. They lived in hills. They lived in raths. And when these Shay were driven into the hills, they were quite literally driven into the forest and lived under the ground in hills. And when the Shay were driven into these places, they disappeared. But the people who took over from the Shay, they saw their disappearance as part of their magic. That is to say that they would hide from the normal people in the forest, in the hills, and they would use their magic to disguise everything in order to make sure that they were not discovered, in order to make sure that they were not driven further and further away. And this could have been quite simply their very good use of camouflage, but it was always seen as part of their magic. To an extent that there were tales of the fact that the Shay actually lived in houses of glass, great towers of glass that they could look out of, but no one could see into. And this is where they lived in some myths, but mostly it would be under the hills. Now, this connects to another part of Celtic mythology, which is very deep and very mysterious as well. It is the idea of other worlds. And in Celtic mythology, there were other worlds everywhere. And what separated this world from the other worlds was very thin as fabric, light fabric. And you could get to an other world through many, many different ways. And there are tales about people simply crossing bridges into an other world, going under the water to get to an other world, going into a cave, going through a door, going into a hill where the Shay would live, going down a well, or going into some place which contained water, like down a stream. And even to some extent, the idea of bards, where they have an impact in the kind of games that we play today, where you can be a bard. A bard could open a portal to another world through his song, and so could a druid. And these gateways between the two worlds existed almost everywhere and could be opened very easily. But for the most of the time, they were shut. And these other worlds, it was not simply one other world. There were other worlds all over the place, and many different ones. And some of them were heavens, and some of them were hells. And there are ones where you could go to the Undying Lands, where its description was that no man grew old, there was no strife, there was no fighting, and from the heavens it did not rain water, but it rained beer. But at the same time, there were some lands that would be hells, and these portals to these other worlds could be pierced through different kinds of means, but usually they were shut. However, there was one night of the year in which all of these portals to these other worlds would be opened, and that would be Samhain's Day, which is October 31st. And all of the inhabitants of these other worlds could come through to our world through these portals that would be opened on October 31st, on Samhain's Day. And it became part of folk history that the Shay, who were the ones who lived underneath the hills, would have a great procession that would come out of the hills from these other worlds where they lived and fled to on Samhain's Day, on that night of Samhain's Day. And they would come out and have a great train that would proceed through the forest, through uninhabited places on that night. And the thing is that the idea of the Shay eventually developed into what we would think of as fairies and leprechauns. So the ideas of leprechauns and of fairies both come from the idea of the Shay, going into their hills, going into their other worlds, using their magic to stay there, and only coming out in trains, big trains of them coming out once a year. However, they could come out through the portals, just like people could go in through the portals every once in a while. And these are where we get the ideas of fairies from the Shay. And in Irish folklore, moving on from myth and legend to folklore, in Irish folklore, the fairies were nasty, nasty people. That is to say, they guarded their secrecy so much that they would be very cruel in making sure that no one discovered them. And this would go back to the Shay, wanting to be left alone in their hills. And the one tale that springs to mind about these people, about these fairies and how nasty they were, was a tale about a woman who was having trouble in childbirth, and she thought she was going to lose the child, so much so that she said that she would give anything if someone could come and help her. And she actually called upon the fairies to come and help her, and she would give them anything so that she could have her child. And so a fairy appeared. But for most people, they can't see fairies because fairies would use their magic and would be invisible to most people. So the fairy had to actually cast a spell to make sure that this woman could see her so that she could help deliver her child. But while she was casting this spell, a man was looking through a hole in the wall, which was a knot that had been poked through. And as he looked into the room while this stuff was going on, the spell affected his eye, his one eye, so that after that point, he could see fairies. And later on in his life, he was at a festival and he saw these people dancing around, two of them, and he couldn't tell why no one else could see them. He didn't understand who they were, why they were so fanciful, and why no one else could see them until he realized that they were fairies. And he went up to the fairies and he said that he was very happy to finally meet some fairies and be able to speak to them and say hello. And the fairies were very taken aback that he could actually see them. And so they asked him how he could see them. And he told them the whole tale about how he could see them because one of his eyes was affected by the spell. And the fairies promptly asked him, which eye was it? And when he told them which eye it was, they promptly tore out his eye. So these are the kinds of nasty things that fairies would do. Nasty things to make sure that no one saw them. And if you did see them, you would be taking your life into your hands. And to some extent, the idea of the Shay and the fairies did get mixed up with the idea of the Fomor, because again, the Fomor could come out from underneath the sea. They were creatures as well that were thought to come from another world. And so this idea of the Shay being nasty and the Fomor being monstrous people to some extent got mixed up in the minds of people in their folklore. And so when they pictured people coming out of the hills on Samhain's Day, that is to say on October 31st, on All Hallows Eve, they would picture them as being nasty, monstrous things. And if you dared to venture out of your house on the day before All Saints' Day, you would be taking your life into your hands because these monstrous people would be everywhere. And if you saw them, they would drag you down with them, or at the very least attack you to make sure that you would never know where and how they got into this world so that you could never discover them again. And the only way that people would come up with to make sure that they didn't get attacked by these monstrous people, these vindictive people that were out on the day before All Saints, was to dress up as monsters, was to dress up as if you were a Fomor, was to dress up as if you were a Shay. And to dress up as a monster would do what the Shay had always done. It would camouflage you. It would make you look and appear as if you were one of them. So if you happen to run into a Shay, if you happen to run into a fairy, if you happen to run into a leprechaun, a Fomor, any of these monsters that would come forth out of these other worlds on the night before All Saints, then you would be camouflaged. You would look like a monster. And that's why you would dress up as a monster on the night before All Saints' Day. And that is the basic reason why people dress up on Halloween. All right, so there's my video, my old video that 500 people used to watch. I know people, excuse me, in the comments are saying, yeah, that's my old format, but really my format has not changed one bit. So hopefully that mythology will spur some conversation talking about Halloween. Let's see. I got to reduce myself on the screen here. 1 second. Stop sharing. And there we go. By the way, this is one of the Fomor in the background. That's why I put his picture on the thumbnail. And I'm trying something new with my lettering. Anyways, let's see who's here because, again, I have to apologize to everyone for showing up late, very late. Honduran was the first one here. It looks like George was here. Vaz was here early. And excuse me. Let's see. There's a lot of crosstalk in the almost hour before I wasn't here. And again, apologize for that. Alessandro show was there at that point, and we're just going to skip by because, again, what we usually do is put our conversation in the comments. So if you have anything that you want to ask me, then about anything, about what I had to say tonight, about Halloween, about any of my books, which links are in the description for my graphic novels, about my channel, about some of the things that I've said on my channel, you go right ahead, put it in the chat and just tag me with it so I know that you're asking me, because there's going to be a lot of crosstalk in the chat here tonight since I was so late. So I'm going to skip down a long ways. Michael also was here early. Thank you very much, everybody, for showing up. Scrolling down, see if there's any. I think I know exactly where I was when I think we're getting to where I came in. Excuse me. Scrolling down. Vaz, Manny was here. Warren the Archangels. I apologize once again, Warren. I see that Miss Maria was here at one point. And let's see, scrolling down, and Zach Dan has rated over from John's long box. Very good. Okay, so I gotten down to the part in the chat where I finally came through and see what we have for any questions anybody is going to ask me. Miss Maria says, did I watch Agatha all along? Nope. I have given up on watching those kinds of Marvel shows. I might watch it if I was going to actually review it or things like that, but no, I've seen enough about it that it's not something I'm going to waste my time on. Let's see, scrolling down. Tony, how you doing? Again, Warren is here, still great. And Honduran says, RJ, Tonight is like a substitute teacher shows up late and then plays a video for the class. Yeah, but it's my video. It's not like I'm showing you somebody else's video. It's just all I do is talk for 20 minutes anyways. I could have put that entire thing on and not told you it was my video, and no one would know the difference. Anyways, let's see. Scrolling down. Warren says the old audio. Yes, Warren, the old audio where I still don't know what I'm doing, but I knew even less back then. Scrolling down. Alessandro, you missed those kinds of videos. I don't know. Do I not still do those kinds of videos? I think I leave them for Wednesday nights so that we can have fun and do some chat at the same time. Scrolling down. George says, so many ancient stories have similarities like this one and Atlantis. I had never thought of it that way. But yeah, I suppose the Fomor would have been thought to live under the water. So yeah, it might have similarities to Atlantis. Honestly, I never thought of that. That's a good way to put it. Let's see. Scrolling down. George also says, I believe senators were just confused with men riding horses, and Cyclopses were just guys who had lost an eye. Could have been. Alessandro says, RJ, speaking about monsters, I noticed that Brogs identify more with monsters than with normal people. For example, many of them are ready to support Starship Troopers bugs rather than humans. Yeah. There is a physiological explanation for that. I don't know if it's the true explanation of why these progressive people think in the way that they do, but at the very least, it's one of the reasons why you can look at their activity and their mindset and try to understand it. And it's the fact that these people have almost a genetic anomaly, so that, well, they have no disgust mechanism like normal people would have. And a disgust mechanism, by the way, is a self-preservation mechanism. So they have this lacking bit of self-preservation. Sometimes, well, a lot of people say it's just genetic. So if they have this genetic lack of self-preservation, which is the disgust mechanism, they don't get disgusted by things normal people would get disgusted by and move away from, in order to make sure you don't get sick or things like that. And because this mechanism is missing and they are attracted to things which are disgusting, more and more they seem to shy away from the normal familial connections that they have, whether that be within their normal families or within their community or even within their country. And they try to make themselves into supposedly feeling people and compassionate people by giving their compassion to people that are so far away from them that they don't actually have to do anything, which is what you get virtue signaling from and all these kinds of things. It's because, again, of this tie to this mechanism of not being able to feel what most people feel grotesque about. So it's one of the theories that's out there. It's an actual, scientific theory. But yeah, that's why these people identify with, if true, it would be one of the definite reasons why these people identify with monsters, why they identify with villains, things like that, which is something I talked about on my channel a lot a couple of years ago, because going over those Marvel podcasts where they talked over and over again about idolizing villains and how they like to write villains more than heroes because heroes were in a box and villains could do anything they really wanted to. Yeah. It would all be tied up into this kind of thinking and almost, again, psychological damage that they have because of genetics, it may be. So yeah, they identify with monsters. Scrolling down. Let's see. Yeah, George is again talking about senators, I think. I mean, if you never saw a horse and you saw someone far away, a man riding a horse would look like one animal. Yes, it would, I suppose. Let's see, scrolling down. Let's see. Zaktan, I think, says, these forests remind me of the trees in Prince Caspian. One of the fun things I always say, I don't know if you guys want to hear me rehash things over and over again, but one of the fun things I find about Irish mythology and Irish society is, in my mind, the way that I have studied mythology over the years, and even at the university level, things like that. You find mythology as a reflection of almost the unconscious understanding of how the world works for people. And you see it very distinctly in Irish myth, because if you look at something like the Book of Kells, you see all of this intricate patterning, which is a Celtic Irish patterns that are in the background. Those are supposed to be twisty, turny representations of what you would see within the forest and within the trees interlocking with each other and their branches and all these kinds of things. So the forest, which again, up until the 1200s, later than 1200s, I guess, for Ireland, because it wasn't until the 1200s that England became anything besides a dense forest. And it happened, I think, in the 1200s was because basically they were trying to rob the king of how much power he had, because he could what was it? I think the way that the historical account goes is that people would be peasants and they would need wood to burn. But if you took wood off of anything that was the king's land, you were doing something illegal. So the king made this illegal, not because he wanted to punish people, but because in order for you to get out of getting a severe punishment, and we're talking severe punishment of getting your hands cut off or your eyes poked out or something like that, you would just pay a fine. And so these fines were paid over and over and over again by the entire countryside of people, and it filled up the coffers of the king, who then had much more wealth than any of the lords. And so the lords decided, okay, how do we make sure that we can depose the king, or at the very least rob him of some power? I know, we'll burn down all the trees. So that's what they did on their lands, and they deforested England around the 1200s, and it didn't really affect Ireland at that time. So you had these dense forests, and because England itself was nothing but dense forest until that time, and Ireland certainly at the same time. So this idea of the interlocking patterns of trees and things like that, it played on the Celtic mind, and it became one of the spurs for their entire culture. So Zach Dan, I know you might think that was a throwaway remark, but the forests and the trees have a large impact on Irish mythology and Irish society, even English society. Let's see, scrolling down. Alessandro says, fairies are cruel and mischievous beings. Yes, indeed. Never trust a fairy. Never trust a fairy. Scrolling down. Warren says, love the Art Nouveau aesthetic. I think it's Alan Lee that does most of like the picture you're looking at in the background right now. And a lot of the pictures that I did are from Alan Lee. He's a beautiful artist, and he does a lot of mythological paintings and drawings and things like that. Scrolling down. Yes, indeed, George. He says, I see you found a source where Tolkien gets some influence from. Yeah, again, because of the tie to the land, Tolkien was always looking at the land and wanting to describe the countryside, and excuse me, the mythology of the countryside did play into a lot of his mindset. Tolkien himself said that in creating his world and his books and his mythology, it was something he was trying to do as a full mythology for the English countryside itself. And again, that draws on those ideas that I was just talking about of the forest and things that live in the forest and how they connect to society and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, very, very big connection with Tolkien. Let's see, scrolling down. Alessandro says, RJ, in various stories, the fairies are described as evil beings, but in others as ambiguous beings who are neither evil nor good and have an alien vision of morality. Okay. Well, that would make some kind of sense, because again, these are people that are driven into basically the hinterlands of your country, into the woods where they can hide, because they were supposed to be completely routed by this new people that would show up on the shores and take over. So they would have a very limited connection with anybody outside of their own systems and their own usually tiny little villages, most probably, if we're talking about it in a more historical setting. So they would have their own moral codes, certainly. Let's see. That George says the Fae from D&D got their name from Irish folklore of the Shay. Very similar names. Yeah. The Fae is I think, if I remember correctly, just a bastardization of the Shay in its Irish form. Scrolling down. Sakdan says, sometimes it is because they, in their immortality, could not relate to mortals. A bit of alien cultural misunderstanding. Okay. Well, that would make sense as well. Let's see. Scrolling down. George says, what does George have to say here? Guess the guy never saw Ghostbusters. Ray, when someone asked you if you were a god, say yes. Yes, indeed. All right. Scrolling down. Let's see how far I am behind in this chat. Michael, thank you very much. It was like literally that video is 5 years old, and it was the first year I had my channel. I don't even think I had a proper microphone back then. So thank you very much. High praise for low quality. Scrolling down. Vaz says the Fomar. Sometimes, well, by the way, if you want to look them up online, usually they're called the Fomari, but I am used to reading Lady Gregory's Irish mythology. They just call them the Fomar. The Fomar are like the deviants of the Eternals. Again, never thought of that, but if you think of Jack Kirby and his inspiration, much of his inspiration, of course, came from Germanic folklore. So I wouldn't doubt that he himself, when he was trying to make a new world, like he was with the Eternals, because he had already drew on all of what he normally would want to do in DC with the New Gods, because I do believe they were before the Eternals, then he might have just moved on to different kinds of myth. Scrolling down. Warren says, same as in a small town in Japanese countryside where people dress up as unai. Very funny to see the foreigners' reactions. I didn't know that they dressed up as unai. That's a good thing to. I should look that up and read about that. That's very interesting. Let's see. Tony says, what is the history of jack-o'-lanterns? I don't know the full history off the top of my head of jack-o'-lanterns, but the Irish used to, and jack-o'-lanterns used to be made out of turnips, not out of pumpkins. Pumpkins were something that happened when the whole thing migrated to America. In Ireland, jack-o'-lanterns were made out of just hollowed out turnips. And why? I'm not entirely sure. I do believe it has something to do with warding off evil during Samhain's day, the night of Samhain. But again, that's just off the top of my head. Scrolling down. Let's see. Calliope is here. How you doing? And says, I've always been fascinated by the Fae. This is a real treat, RJ. Oh, thank you very much. I love Irish mythology. So I played Crom the Destroyer, the trailer for Crom the Destroyer at the first of this live stream, and Crom the Destroyer is based on Irish mythology, straight up. There is, Conan the Barbarian from Robert E. Howard. Robert E. Howard, I would say, looking at all of the things that he has within his storytelling, he probably read Lady Gregory and her collected works of Irish mythology as a kid as well, because they're much older than him. They were written, I think, in the mid 1800s, maybe late 1800s. He took a lot of his inspiration for Conan, which would be Khan of the 100 Battles. Basically, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of, or different people named Khan within Irish mythology, and Khan of the 100 Battles, if I remember correctly, was the direct inspiration for Conan. I do something very similar. There's two characters that I sort of smushed together from Irish mythology. One would be Conor Moore, who was a great a great king, and there was also Oishin, son of Fan, who was the leader of the Fëanor, which was a fighting force, was supposed to be the greatest fighting force in the entire world at that time. Anyways, and they would go as far as Greece and fight people. But I took those two characters and I sort of smushed them together and made one character, which is Crom the Destroyer, the character which is King from Crom the Destroyer, and used Irish mythology there as well. And one of the treats for the people who ordered the Prince story with Crom the Destroyer, because there still is. You can order a Prince story that I wrote. It's just a very short story. Does have some art with it, but since everything was so late, and is still so late because we're still trying to get that book done, I added at least one more story. There might be a third one that I finish before we go to print, but the second story is attached to that as well. So if you bought or will buy that Prince story from Crom the Destroyer, you get two stories now instead of one, and the second story does include a Fomor in it. So yeah, I use Irish mythology a lot, especially for again, Crom the Destroyer. Let's see, scrolling down. Honduran says, RJ, on your video on Saturday, you said Black Pigeon didn't understand because he's Canadian. I thought you were Canadian. I have lived in across the border, back and forth. I wasn't born in Canada, but I've lived for wide stretches on both parts of the border, and I just hopped back and forth because we were basically East Coast people, and we really didn't see. And we're talking back in the 80s and the 70s. The border really wasn't much to cross, not like it is today. It's ridiculous today. If you ask me, we would just go from one side of the border to the other. But yeah, we very much had an American mindset. So I do have, I think, a good understanding of how both sides of the border work and how the differences between those American and Canadian ideas actually play out. I know that I'm a bit rough and tumble. You might not believe this, but I'm a bit rough and tumble when I deal with people in a direct way. And I remember when I was working, doing my research one time, and I was working in a Canadian office, right? And I was there for quite a while doing some research, and people were a bit off put there by how pointed I was and all this kind of thing. And they finally realized that, oh, you're American. Oh, it makes sense now. Anyway, just a ridiculous story. Anyways, let's see, scrolling down. Zaktan has an interesting comment. He says, I heard a story about a fellow named Jack that cheated the devil, so when he died, he couldn't go to heaven or hell, so he put his soul in a lantern. Oh, okay. Well, that sounds like a folk tale. So I would not doubt that that is a very well told folk tale, Zaktan. But folk tales are like, Paul Bunyan and stuff like that. They're based on more of a, we'll say, countryside understanding of a few things that pop up within storytelling. They're very different from myths and legends in that regard. But again, as I said at the beginning of the video that I clicked on and let everybody watch here, there are multiple origin stories within myths and legends. If you add also on top of that folklore, you get many different source origins of different tales and different things that pop up within your culture. Let's see, scrolling down. George says, RJ cares about his sanity too much to watch Agatha. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, George. Thank you very much. Let's see, Anna, how you doing? Yeah, I am very late, Anna, so you are not late. It is I that was late. If you came in late, then good on you, and thank you for being here. Let's see, scrolling down. Any more comments for me? Alessandro says, I noticed that the fairy folk are a very common archetype in world folklore. For example, the Japanese yokai and the Arab genie. And I was just talking to John about this. We were talking about, fairies. We were talking about, well, even the idea of elves come out of this entire thing. But if you look at the different ways of describing almost very similar creatures, it's just different European names for the same thing. So you get things like fairies that are called fairies here, but they're called something else in Germany. Just like the fact that you have dwarves and they're called, something else. There's a German name for them as well. So yeah, there is this kind of movement of ideas throughout all of Europe. So I would not doubt that it carries on to the rest of the world as well, especially similar kinds of societies like Japan. I mean, you have Japan, which is an island, you have Ireland, which is an island. And although you may not think that's enough to have them develop in a similar way, having lived on islands and seeing the very unique way that the people live there, I would say, yeah, it is enough. Let's see, scrolling down. We have Zach Dan. He says, true, dragons, fairies, and giants were fairly common or perhaps transcendent. I think, let's see, there is some scholarship on that as well. I always go back to people like F.M. Cornford. He did very interesting books like From Myth to Religion and things like that. So they try to take all of the the supernatural out of it, but he talks about, and I'm sure more than just him, talk about these ideas as being universal for people. Let's see, scrolling down. Tony says, RJ is going as the patriarch for Halloween. I quite honestly, if I did not have this Wednesday live stream where I wanted to do something for Halloween, I would have completely forgot it was Halloween tomorrow. Honestly, I live in the middle of nowhere. We don't get anybody for Halloween, and even if kids came up to my lane, they probably wouldn't want to come into my house because it would look too scary in Halloween. All right, let's see. Scrolling down. Not that I decorate it for Halloween, just that it looks normally scary. There is a fun thing about Irish mythology as well. You see these people. Usually, it's something like Fiann and the Fianna. It happens to them all the time, but they'll go hunting in the woods. And again, deep woods. These are dense woods, and they don't really get lost, but they just go too far in so that they can't get out before the night falls. And usually they're trying to get out, and then they see a light somewhere, and there's a light in the middle of the woods, and it leads them to a house, and the house has some occupant in it that is like a spellcaster and tries to, I don't know, eat them or sticks them to the floor, things like that. It happens over and over again. But yeah, my house is like that. It's like, I didn't know there was a house way back there. Look, there's a light. I don't think we should go anywhere near that. That's what my house is like. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see if we have any more comments for me. George says, can't hunt deer, can't get firewood. Surprised that peasants didn't revolt earlier. Well, here's the thing about the firewood, George. You couldn't cut firewood. You could pick up firewood. And even that the story of Good King Wenceslas, the peasant there, he's gathering firewood. So you were allowed to pick up wood that had fallen down and was laying on the ground by itself, but you couldn't cut anything down. So that was usually the medieval line that you couldn't cross. So it would allow them to some subsistence living at the very least. We'll put it that way. Let's see. Scrolling down. Anna says, what about the Day of the Dead? In Mexico is a very big celebration, while in other LA County, people only go to the cemetery to pay homage and respect for the deceased. Again, I don't know very much about the Day of the Dead, but is the Day of the Dead on All Souls Day? Because there's All Saints Day and All Souls Day. So if we're talking, I would guess here. This is my guess. I don't know very much at all about the Day of the Dead, but my guess would be that since you have a Spanish culture and Mexico is a Spanish culture, they're very Catholic, and it would most likely be connected with a feast day of that kind, either All Souls or something of the kind. So yeah, there was a connection that way, but it's not a direct connection. Let's see, scrolling down. Zach Dan says it has a similar theme. When the veil between worlds becomes thin, don't know much more than that offhand. Well, yeah, and one of the funny things too, if you look at what's his name? I can't remember the writer's name. I never remember names when I want to. They always elude me at the very time I want them. But I'll remember book series is written about other worlds and veils before the end of this video, hopefully, and I'll come back to that. Let's see. Alessandro says, in addition to fairies, dragons are also very common archetypes. They have different shapes and powers from culture to culture, but always maintain reptilian serpent-like tails. My guess is everybody just worked off of the fossils that were in their area because dinosaurs were a thing. Scrolling down. Alessandro continues, after all, the word dragon comes from the Greek word serpent, and they are always being surrounded by an aura of fear and reverence. Yeah, I would think that's mostly because of the size. Again, if we're going back to, they were just looking at fossils and trying to understand where these things came from. Scrolling down. Let's see. Scrolling down. Elijah is here. How you doing, Elijah? He says, RJ, I have not received my comic yet, even though it said it was shipped many weeks ago. I'll have to look into that, Elijah. I know that sometimes they get waylaid in the mail, so I will have to look into that. Thank you for letting me know. If you could put just your backer number in the chat so that I know what your backer number is, I could look it up much quicker. I don't know if you have Elijah Brown as your name that you ordered from, so backer number would be much more helpful. Let's see, scrolling down. George says, well, a hollowed out pumpkin would be easier than a turnip. I can't see how you'd fit a candle in a turnip. I don't know, turnips can grow very big. I worked on a farm, and one of the things we did was harvest turnips. Turnips can grow really big, especially if you're making them, the source of you staying alive. You'd want to grow big turnips, if you ask me. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see. Michael says, Kuhulean. No Kuhulean. Again, pronunciation, I don't know. I do know some Irish Gaelic, but my pronunciation, I'm sure by anyone who actually knows Irish Gaelic in a complete sense would probably bury their head in their hands at my pronunciation. But Cuchulainn, which would be one of the great early heroes of Irish mythology. But no connection to Cuchulainn, as far as I remember anyway. Let's see. Scrolling down. Looking at some crosstalk in the chat. Just scrolling down to see if there's anything else for me. Let's see. Honduran says, RJ, given how now people are coming to America from Canada now too, it's probably for the best that the border is more controlled. I don't really see much reason, but yes, I suppose. And the thing is too, they're crossing from America into Canada. I think within like the central Ontario area, they're just walking, or Quebec, they're just walking across the border. So yeah, I agree that it should be more secure, but there are vast swaths of of America and Canada where there is just nothing but fields. You can walk across the border, or there's even towns which one side of the street is Canada and one side of the street is America. Now you're not supposed to cross the street, but we're just talking about border check. I'm just talking about border checks and things like that. We usually went through St. Stephen, and it just got ridiculous after a while because people who are illegal or doing illegal activities, they're not going to go through a border check. But anyway, scrolling down. Alessandro says, RJ, any thoughts about DC Absolute? No, really, no thoughts on it. My local comic shop closed down, Alessandro. So I used to go in every week and just at the very least check out what was there. But yeah, it closed down. There is another comic shop in the area, but I will not unless I'm absolutely forced to need something like comic book bags in order to send my graphic novels. I will not go into it. It's just that bad. It's the reason why most of you are here. Let's put it that way. It's very progressive. Very progressive. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Honduran says, RJ, you voting on election day or have you done it already? I have not been in the U.S. for the last couple of months, so I am not allowed to. I've been across the border. My books get printed in Canada, and that's where I've been for a while. So, unfortunately, I am not going to be able to do that at all. I have been here so long right now because that's where this house is, in the middle of the woods, besides other things that I own, that I unfortunately cannot. Let's see. Scrolling down. George says, I'm torn between Tolkien's elves that were taller than humans and D&D elves which are smaller than humans. Interesting. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. Honestly, quite honestly, and has anybody ever thought this, that elves might have come from the fact that, and I would go with shorter in this version of the way that I think about it in my head sometimes, the fact that Europeans encountered Orientals. It might have been. They might have, because there were times where in Roman times the Chinese emperors sent envoys to try to connect with Romans. They just got completely shipwrecked and decided to turn around. And so there is, and Greek and Macedonians for Alexander the Great, they went into Asia, right? There is a Chinese, I think it's a Chinese town where people have kept relics from their ancestors, and they're basically Greek armor because that's how far the Greeks have made it. So, who knows, honestly. Scrolling down. Let's see what we got here. Michael says, I didn't expect RJ to live in a gingerbread house. Yeah. I live in a hobbit hole. I live in a hobbit hole. Yeah, that's the thing, Michael. I found a place where there were no building codes and no one would care what I built, and I built it myself. See, I live in a hobbit hole. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see. Alessandro says, RJ, do you plan on selling digital versions of your comics? Yes and no. Fade to Blue, which is the new one that we're working on right now. We have issue 1 done. They're only going to be basically the size of a floppy, so 22 to 24 pages. We have number 1 done. Number 2, we have, I think, half done, a little more than half done right now. Now, I still have to get them lettered. They're going to be black and white, but they're going to be available digitally. Whether the other ones are ever going to be available digitally, I don't know. I don't really have plans on that, but I don't know. But I'm going to start offering some books digitally, which I don't know, depending on where I'm going to get them published digitally, whether or not I will have a chance to make hard copies and sell them in the future. But Fade to Blue would be one of those books. I think the people that I was talking to a couple of years ago, they're probably, I don't recall off the top of my head, but they do a lot of South American publications for online digital stuff. So they're a big platform. Scrolling down. Let's see. Zach Dan says, but the forest is dark and the will-o-wisp is awful convenient. Yes, will-o-wisp, that's one of the things I completely forgotten about. Will-o-wisps are very much a trick of the mind. Not only the fact that if someone is walking through the forest with a lantern in their hands, it bobs up and down, which looks like a bobbing light, because the person walking is bobbing up and down. But at the same time, there's a funny trick of the human mind, which, and I've experienced this myself, being in a field at nighttime, watching stuff. Anyways, it was part of me working on the farm. You had to stay out all night for just reasons. I won't go into it. But if you see in complete darkness a light, if you concentrate on that light, you will begin to see it bob around, even though it might be fixed to something. So if you're in a completely dark room, and there's a tiny spot of light on the wall, and it's fixed to the wall, and you concentrate on that light, it will begin to move, and it won't actually begin to move. Your brain will perceive it as beginning to move because your eyes are moving, and there is no contrast. There's only darkness besides the light. So it looks like to your brain that the light is moving, whereas your eyes start to move and bob around. So will-o-wisps are a trick of the mind in more than one way. So let's see, scrolling down. Scrolling down. A lot of people talking, which I love in the comments, but I just have to scroll down to make sure that I get some comments for me. Elijah 515. Okay, I will do that. Elijah, I will take a look at that tomorrow, and I will email you because I have your email address because you ordered. Thank you very much for the backer number. Scrolling down. Let's see. George says, let me see if I can show this. It's true. I mean, 40-year-old Japanese women look like they're 16, but when they turn 80, they look 200. Here's a trade-off, I guess. But yeah, I mean, who knows? Yeah. To my mind, that would be the most logical explanation of how the idea of elves came to be in the format that we have anyways. I think that they're formed by other kinds of myths, stuff that we were talking about tonight, but I think that might be a definite connection. Honduran says, I think elves were just a type of spirit. I don't know where Tolkien got his elves from. I'd have to look into that. I don't know either. I have a good friend who knows the Silmarillion like the back of his hand. I could ask him. Let's see, scrolling down. Zach Dan says, it is an interesting idea that elves could be inspired by travelers from faraway places that would seem alien to locals. Quite honestly, one of the things I talked about just earlier from my other video was the cat heads and the dog heads, right? Almost every culture has this idea somewhere in their myths, even in the Middle Ages, of cat-headed people and dog-headed people. And to me, again, these will be far off places where they would see dog-headed people. I know it sounds completely not politically correct, but I honestly think that the Europeans, when they got to, let's say, India, they would just look at these people and say, yeah, these are dog-headed people, because they were so foreign to anything that they had ever seen that that's what they would call them. If you ask me, that's where the ideas, things like that come from. Let's see. Honduran says, RJ, not to get too personal, so I don't answer if you don't want to. Are you married, or do you live in the forest by yourself? I do not live in the forest by myself, Honduran. No, I do not. Let's see. That's a good one, Tony. I always thought that Namor and the other Atlanteans looked Asian. Yeah. That's a good observation. Let's see, scrolling down. Let's see. Well, here's George says, Today's fantasy writers always described elves as Asians with blonde hair. Asians actually can have blonde hair. There are, I don't know. I don't know if it's a peculiarity, especially in some Chinese, Chinese tribes, we'll say, because basically Korea is made up of one tribe. If I remember correctly, Japan is about three, but you have 20, 30 more plus tribes within China, and within one of those tribes you can definitely get blonde haired Asians, blonde haired Chinese people, which is funny. You don't see them very often, but yeah, it's a thing that happens. Let's see. Michael says Namor is Roman spelled backwards. Was it meant to be Roman spelled backwards? I don't know. Thomas is here. How you doing, Thomas? Nice to see you. Scrolling down. Let's see. Scrolling down. If there's anything, I don't know if I'm getting close to the end of the chat or if it's going to jump on me again. Just let me see. Oh, there's Alessandro. Alessandro says, RJ, why do you think that the progressives are obsessed with creating characters who suffer from what? A rare skin disease in which the absence of melanin causes the appearance of white spots. I'm not familiar with what you're talking about, Alessandro. I have never really seen this, except for the fact, I don't know. Give me 1 second here. Were you, Alessandro, in the chat or listening to John's stream that I was doing just an hour ago, John's Longbox? He was talking about this very weird comic, Penthouse Comics, that just came out, and he bought it because it was something that used to be out in the 80s, and he wanted to see what it was like now because it's a new one. And he said you got story after story of black people pretending to be white people to get revenge. It was weird. Even his description of it was weird, really weird. So you got progressive Penthouse, if you could believe such a thing. Anyways, but yeah, they keep on telling story after story about people who are black pretending to be white in order to take revenge on white people. So I don't know. Maybe that's the entire thing. Maybe that's where I've never heard of this, Alessandro. So I'm just, again, talking off the top of my head, but maybe that's why. Let's see. Michael says the dog-headed men of India are mentioned in lots of European sources. Yeah. So, let's see. Elijah says, RJ, do you believe the Nephilim are real? I believe there was a reason for the flood, and I don't know if I can remember if they were called Nephilim, but I do believe there were giants and creatures that were, we'll say, aberrations, and there was being someone who I'm a Catholic, so I'm a Christian, and I believe biblical stories, and so it is part of one of the stories that this is why the flood happened to begin with, to wipe these abominations off the face of the earth. Let's see, scrolling down. I never really talk about the spiritual side of things in my videos or stuff like that, but yeah, I believe in, I'm a spiritual person, to say the least. Scrolling down. Let's see, scrolling down. Oh, Zaktan makes a good point. Some places have statues with animal heads on human bodies, like in Egypt. Yes, indeed. Why the Egyptians did, I was never very big on Egyptology. I tried to learn Sanskrit at one point, and I was just like, nope. And so I just really gave up on Egyptology. I would like to know the origin of that, because you are completely right, Zaktan. They did do that, and I know there are reasons for it. I ran across reasons, but I don't remember what they are. I do have a encyclopedia of Egyptology and Egyptian myth and stuff they got around here somewhere, but I never really paid a whole lot of attention to it. Scrolling down, Tony says, RJ, what is your favorite Halloween film? I don't know if it's a Halloween film or not, but usually I try to watch John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, which I don't know why. It was because I couldn't find it for the longest time, and I just wanted to watch it. And then I finally found it and just made a I guess, a habit of watching it around Halloween. So scrolling down. Let's see, scrolling down. Elijah says, I have not studied Irish mythology. I was thinking about Oisin and the mythical place he went to, which is, I did talk about it in the video that I played the first. That would be the Undying Lands. And the Undying Lands play a whole lot. Again, as I said in my Crom the Destroyer, well, the mythology basically that precedes Crom the Destroyer. Because if you noticed in the trailer that I played at the first of this stream, King, who is the main character, he goes away and then comes back. Where did he go away to? He went to the Undying Lands. So yeah, that's where Oisin went as well. Scrolling, but sometimes the Undying Lands can be more than one island. They're lands, plural, so it can be different things. Scrolling down. Let's see. Thomas says many depictions of elves used to be more on the Finnish and East Scandinavian facial structures. Very interesting. Scrolling down again. These would be, you never know how far away was a long time ago in Middle Ages or even in ancient times. What we might consider very close would be very far away, and something just as I don't know, close to each other as England and Wales would be far enough apart so that you would not see those people there as having correct facial features and think of them as something else. Scrolling down. Scrolling down. Alessandro, I don't know where you get this from, but I will not dispute it. Alessandro says the ancient Egyptians were furries. Let's see. Thomas brings up a good point. He says, sometimes some things can be both symbolic and specific descriptive at the same time. I completely agree. Let's see. Scrolling down. I don't know, Zachtan, if this is directed towards me, but it's a very interesting comment. He says, I think Hannibal would have won, but it is also possible that it is better that he lost. I read Carthage had some human sacrifices and was more Phoenician than other regions at the time. It was very Phoenician. It's basically, if I remember correctly, again, another friend that I have, a different friend this time, he's very, very much into the Mediterranean societies, ancient cultures, and things like that. He could sit here and talk about the Phoenicians all day, and he usually tells me these fun stories. But if I remember correctly, the Carthaginians were part of the tribes that were driven out of what is basically Jerusalem. That's when they started to move more westward, if I remember correctly. But I'd have to ask my friend. So yeah, it is a good thing that Carthage didn't win. If you ask me, they were more Middle Eastern than the European side of the Romans and things like that. Let's see, scrolling down, going through the crosstalk. Let's see. Elijah says, RJ, there is a Japanese version of Oisin called, and I won't even try to pronounce that, turns old, but not ages to death like Oisin, depending on how you say his name. Also, his neighbors changed and is not in ruins like Oisin. Well, that's the thing about Oisin, is that he came back to Ireland when the Fiann, which was his father was Fiann, and the Fianna, which were the great warriors, they were all gone, and there was nothing but, he basically says, clerks or clerics, so basically priests and things like that. So it was fairly modern times for Ireland, and he laments it so much that he falls off the horse that was supposed to keep him from touching the ground, and then it turns him into a very old man because his age catches up with him. And if I remember correctly, there is, we'll call it a folk story, because heaven only knows, but at the time of St. Patrick is when Oisin was supposed to have come back to Ireland, because Oisin was the one who converted St. Patrick was the one who converted Oisin to actually be a Christian, because he wanted to stay with him, because I don't know, He was the person who had the most control, the most power in the region because he was very saintly. So he stuck with him, and then he eventually became a Christian. That's part of the folklore. But again, who knows? It could be legend as well. There could be some old guy who decided he wanted to be Oishan and just decided that's what he was going to tell everybody at that time. Let's see. Scrolling down. Thomas says, I tend to think that the ancients probably traveled more than we give them credit for, although they probably stayed settled or kept to their own kind, which gave ethnic, tribal, genetic traits. I wouldn't doubt that the ancients would have done so. But whether they were kept to their own, depends on what kind of people they were. One of the funny things that they believe right now about why the Vikings were driven out of, North America, was because they encountered Indian tribes, North American Indian tribes, and they gave them milk to drink, which they couldn't process. So it made them extremely ill. So they thought it was an attack. So that's just a story about, ancient cultures might not want to mix. It always turns out poorly. Let's see, scrolling down. Let's see, scrolling down. Scrolling down a little more. I think I might be getting to the end of the chat, but I'm not entirely sure. A lot of people talking about the Phoenicians. Dondoran says, RJ, have you ever thought about becoming a Protestant? No, I'm a cradle Catholic, and I went through a process of let's just say testing my faith when I was in university, because I had to deal with progressivism there. It was just in your face, and a lot of things. So that's I came out much more convicted than I went in, and that was basically the end of it. Sound Engraver is here. How you doing, Sound Engraver? She says, just finished teaching. I have to catch this on replay. Hope all is well and everyone is safe for Halloween. Yes. I think everyone will be safe for Halloween, but if you want to hear about unsafe Halloweens, go back and listen to John's Long Box. And when I was talking to him and I were talking about the 80s and the 90s, how unsafe things were, and Halloween got into that. Anyways, just a little plug for John's channel as well. People are just piling comments one on top of another because I don't know, people don't want me to stop. Let's see. I'll have to scroll down a little more. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see if there's any more comments for me. Zach Dan says, not exactly ancient, but Spain wanted to trade with India and China when Muslims blocked the path. That's what started the age of exploration. Scrolling down. Let's see. George says, well, the Viking settlements probably failed because there was no gold in North America. If they landed in Mexico, they would have been basic. Yeah, that might have been so. Let's see. Scrolling down. Michael says Viking graffiti has been found in Turkey, North Africa, and Italy. Oh yeah, the Vikings were definitely that far down. They were used as mercenaries, basically. Scrolling down. Tony says, RJ, where did the strange custom, strangers handing out candy to children, come from? Where did that come from? There was basically, so if I remember correctly, not to get too deep into it, Tony, but as far as I remember, so you would put on a mask if you were to go outside during Samhain's night, because you didn't want to be confronted by these Shay, who would then do nasty things to you because you could see them. So you would put on a mask to make it look like you were one of them. But one of the other traditions that popped up was, if you did not want them coming to your house, you would leave an offering for them on your doorstep, which would normally be food. And so they would just take the food and leave and not try to get into your house if they came by, or into your area, into your town, or things like that. That, I think, is the origin of people going to the door, first of all, with masks on, and then getting a treat. So the treat originally was just food. So scrolling down, and we'll see if we have anything else here for me. Everyone is basically saying goodnight. I've been talking for, an hour and 20 minutes. Let's see. Thomas says, RJ, have you heard the story where King Arthur is buried in Kentucky? No, I have never heard that story. I have heard the story of why the Vikings are in Minnesota, because they thought the Vikings got all the way up to Minnesota, but that was just some guy, as far as we know, trying to forge ruins and burying them. Scrolling down. I've never heard that one, honestly, Thomas. Let's see, scrolling down. Zekdan says, it was kind of a mixed strategy hiring mercenaries for Roman legions. It helped with Roman manpower, but the legions did not have innate loyalty to the Roman Empire. Yes, that was one of the definite downfalls of the Roman Empire. Sound Engraver, thank you very much for the $2 super chat. Thank you. As I always say, go on over to Sound Engraver's channel. She has a great channel. She does a lot more musical-based things than I do, but she's based in other ways as well. Let's see. Scrolling down. All right. Alessandro says, Happy Halloween. So does Warren. And that's about the end of the chat. I want to thank everybody for showing up. And once again, I apologize profusely for making everyone wait. That was my own fault. First of all, for scheduling the wrong time. And secondly, because I was just not paying attention to the time when I was on John's channel. So thank you very much, everyone, for showing up. As always, I say to anyone who is new, you might want to check out my graphic novels. Links for those are in the description. I talked about Crom the Destroyer here tonight, about how it was based a lot on Irish mythology. And I am going to play the second trailer for Crom the Destroyer. The first one was at the first of this video, and the second one will be at the end here. And again, links for my graphic novels are in the description if anybody wants to go over and order a copy of one of my graphic novels. And I thank you very much to everyone who is here tonight. And I will, I'll have to take Calliope off of there 1 second here, because if I don't, it'll not show up. Or there we go. George has the last word. All right. Thank you once again, everyone. And I will play Crom the Destroyer, trailer 2, and say goodnight. If I find it, where the heck did I put it? Again, my technical skills are just so poor. Here it is. Here we go. Bye.
No matter how many wars you fight, no matter how much blood you shed, no matter how much rage you loose, no matter how many demons you face, no matter how many companions you lose, no matter if our kingdom falls, I know that you will return to me in honor.